Thank you for attending today. We have a workshop today talking about effective interviewing to get you ready for all those internship and job interviews that you may have coming up. And today we have our guest presenter, Sare Arnold from Enterprise Holdings, who's going to walk us through the presentation. But I'll just open it to Sare now to introduce herself and get us started.
Thank you, Lauren. Yes, so my name is Sare Arnold, and I am a talent acquisition manager for Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And talent acquisition is a fancy name for recruiting. And I've actually had the pleasure of recruiting at Bridgewater for the past 23 years, I believe. So it's been a really, really positive experience. I've been doing, well, I started with Enterprise as a management trainee right out of school. And then after about 3 years of working in the field and management, went into recruiting. And it's been a great, great career. I've loved every minute of it. I love bringing talent into the organization. And I obviously love working with Bridgewater. We've hired so many great students over the years. So I'm excited to talk to you about interviewing. Us recruiters at Enterprise often talk about, with interviewing, you can only control what you can control, right? So you cannot control what an employer is going to ask you in an interview, but you can do a lot of preparation. So this presentation will hopefully give you some of the pointers to help you, to kind of set you up for success. Okay, stage one, the preparation, which is what it's all about. So, one of the things that is challenging, I think, for a lot of students is selling yourself. And really selling yourself is really no harder than just being able to articulate some of the skills that you have, your abilities, what you're interested in. So I'll give you an example of why this is hard sometimes. So I'll have a student who is, let's say, a business major, and I'll say to them, tell me about your career interests. And they're like, well, I'm open to anything. And I'm like, okay, like anything as in like education, social services, business, criminal justice, is it open, that open, or can you articulate that you're excited about a business career? And I kind of see myself, in the operational side of business or something along those lines. So it's not, when we ask you about what you're interested in and what your career interests are, we don't need you to be so super specific as to have your whole life mapped out in front of you. We just kind of want to know, where are your interests? So if you can kind of practice articulating that a bit, that will help you when you get that question of, tell me what you're interested in. The only other thing I was going to tell you is with previous jobs that you've had, there were probably things you loved about the job and things you didn't love about the job. The things you loved were probably the things you were really good at. So like if you were really, really great with customer service and sales, then you're probably going to be heading towards a career where you have a lot of interaction. And so again, just assessing what you've done in the past will help you figure out like what type of skill sets that you want to use in the future. Okay, another thing that is super important when you're preparing to apply to a company and go through an interview process is just the research of the employer. There's a lot of information out there. Maybe you might not have access to everything you need to know, but you will have access to a lot of things, such as the history of the company, kind of the organizational structure. Definitely they'll talk to you about philosophy, mission statement, things like that on the website. And then you can do other research other than the website on such as LinkedIn, Glassdoor. There's a lot of really helpful websites out there that you can do your research on. With the things that you cannot find, right? So you may not find real specific details about policies and benefits, for instance, but that's something that you could write down as a question. Say, hey, I was doing some, research on your company. And this was one area that I wasn't able to find a lot of information on. Could you potentially, fill me in on this? And so by doing that, even though you don't know the answer, it's a positive that you have done your research and you have a thoughtful question based on your research that you're asking. So I think that's super important. And again, it'll really help you, because we're going to talk at the end about what kind of questions to ask. It'll really help you in preparing your questions, doing research. Just an FYI, when I have a candidate interview with me who doesn't have any questions, that leads me to believe that they did no research before talking to me. Okay. So again, it's important to practice some of the common questions, like tell me about yourself. I mean, I don't really use that question a whole lot because it's so wide open that a candidate might give me a 3-word answer, or it could be a 20-minute answer. And I don't have 20 minutes to spend on one question. So I don't tend to use that question a whole lot, but certainly you're going to have to talk about yourself. So it's a good question to be able to answer. And when you tell an employer about yourself, it's like your 30-second or 1-minute elevator pitch. It's a little bit about, maybe the experience that you had at Bridgewater, how you chose your major, and then a little bit about, what you're looking to do in the future. Strengths and weaknesses. I mean, strengths are usually a little easier to articulate, I think. With weaknesses, I wouldn't necessarily use the word weakness in an interview, but I might say one area of opportunity. And maybe talk about some things that you've done to overcome areas where you're not as strong in. So for example, maybe in high school, you were really scattered with your schoolwork and not very organized. And so you figured out a great system that would help you in college so that you could be more effective with your grades. So I think employers love to hear, they don't expect you to be perfect. They love to hear that you are aware of yourself and can develop, develop methods to kind of overcome things that might be considered a weakness. And also, again, that what I just mentioned about when candidates don't have any questions, I know they didn't do any research. So a lot of employers, I don't necessarily call people out on this one, but a lot of employers will say, like, tell me what you know about the company. And you really have to be prepared to share what you've learned about the company. And they're not looking to you to regurgitate specific lines off the website or anything, but they do want to know that you've spent a little bit of time preparing. And the question, why should we hire you? That's a real tough one. It's basically an opportunity for you to sell the employer on how you believe you're the strongest candidate for this program, right? Or this job. And so it's an opportunity for you to kind of recap a lot of your strengths, and also an opportunity for you to really sell the employer on your genuine interest in the job. If 2 candidates have equal skill sets, one candidate wants it more than the other, just pure, passion and excitement for the opportunity, but their skill sets are equal, the person with the more passion is probably going to get the offer every time. So don't be afraid to show your enthusiasm for the opportunity. Okay, so behavioral-based interviewing, you may not have heard of this term, or you may have, but it's a really common form of interviewing that a lot of employers have been using for about I'm going to say it's been around because when I came into recruiting 23 years ago, companies were already starting to use behavioral-based interviewing. It's been around for a while. And the reason it's been around for a while is because it's very effective. So with behavioral-based interviewing, employers will ask you questions that will require a specific example as your response. So, it's give me an example of, tell me about a situation where you've handled such and such. So what that does, it doesn't allow a candidate to get away with a one-word answer. So if I want to know if a candidate is good in sales, I cannot ask that person, are you good in sales? Because they could just say yes. And it doesn't mean that they actually are good in sales. But if I ask someone to tell me about a time when they've had to sell a product or an idea, and then they have to go through an actual example, that would give me much more insight into their sales ability than just saying, are you good in sales? I think the next slide, Lauren, might have a good example. Oh, yeah, the STAR method. Okay, then the example. So the STAR method is the method that it's the 4 points that you want to make when you're responding to a behavioral-based question, okay? So when you tell the story, you want to make sure you describe the situation, the task at hand, the actions that you took to solve the problem, and then what were the results. And so if you miss out on one piece of that, it's sort of like you're missing a pretty important part of the story. So I'll give you an example on the next slide. There's a really good example of a question that might get asked of you. So the question is, are you a good team player? Okay, so you could just answer that question, yes, but the thing that you would want to do is expand on it. So for example, 3 weeks ago, I was asked by my supervisor at my part-time job to work with 3 other staff members to get a package of supplies out to a customer in 2 hours. So that's the situation. Generally, assembling that type of package working alone would take 4 hours from start to finish. So that's kind of the task at hand. First, I gathered the other staff, explained our timeline, and assigned tasks. I worked with another person on the team to assemble the parts of the package. The rest of the team and I then completed the shipping labels. About an hour before the deadline, I checked the progress of each team member and assisted when needed. So that was the action that that person took to accomplish, the mission. As a result, we not only met the deadline, but completed the entire process 15 minutes in advance. My supervisor later told us how pleased the customer was with our work. So there's the positive outcome. So you can see where if you miss any part of that, the interviewer is not going to understand the role that you took in the successful outcome. And successful outcomes are what we're aiming for in an interview process. So I'll give you an example. With my interviews, I ask a lot of questions about customer service, and I will ask with every candidate, tell me about a challenging situation that you've handled with a customer. So a bad example to give would be that one customer out of 1,000 that comes in the business screaming and leaves still screaming. And there was like nothing you could do to help them because there's nothing you could do to calm them down, right? That's 1 in 1,000. Leave that example behind. Don't share it in an interview. Focus on that 10% of customers that maybe come into the business and are really upset about whatever it is. And because you took the time to help them ask the right questions, take action, they left happy, right? They left a happy customer. It's not that hard. It's just listening and responding to them and putting them first, right? It's not that hard, but use an example where it started out not so great, but the outcome was very positive because of the effort you made. Again, avoid any examples where it was so bad that you had to pass it to a supervisor, because at that point, your supervisor is solving the problem, you're not. So stick to the examples where you were able to solve the problem. Thanks, Lauren. So skill sets desired by employers. So it doesn't matter what the job is. It could be a job in education. It could be a highly technical position, engineering, business. It doesn't really matter what the job is. These skill sets that you see on this slide are really what every employer are looking for. So it looks like a long list, but a lot of them are kind of intertwined. So doesn't matter what you're doing, professionalism and communication skills are a big deal when you work in a professional environment. And it's funny how all these skill sets kind of tie in together, right? So if you are creative, but you can't communicate your creativity, then the creativity doesn't do the company any good, right? You know, beyond communication and professionalism, you know, are things like computer skills and being detail oriented and things like that. But again, all of the other skill sets that you see really tie into being a very good communicator and being a team player. And then there are jobs, of course, where you're going to require leadership skills to move forward. So, you know, that's really important, like especially with our job at Enterprise, we hire for a management trainee program. So on top of all those other skill sets, leadership skills are very, very crucial because we want folks coming in who are going to move up in management. So if you give a good star response with, you know, the problem, the action, what you did to try to resolve it, and then the positive result, you're actually going to be proving that you have a lot of these skill sets in that one response. So I'll give you an example, like let's say you're on a school project and one member of your team is not pulling their weight, okay? So you as the leader, pull them aside and talk to them privately so that you don't embarrass them in front of the team. And you talk to them about, hey, like what's going on? Like, how can I help? Are you having trouble with your part? Like, whatever it is, you let them know that you want to help. And your teammate communicates to you that like they have so much on their plate. They've got a family, they've got school, work, and they're just not able to get it all done. And one of the challenges is the technology that you're using in your group to chat. So maybe you come up with a creative way of making it easier for that person to communicate, and then they end up getting more involved in the project, and at the end result is that the team gets an A on the project, right? So in that example, you're actually selling the employer on your ability to care about another person, to be a team player, taking the initiative, right, to solve a problem, communication skills, you're solving a problem, so problem solving skills, you're being creative, tactfulness, self-confidence, leadership, being organized, interpersonal skills, flexibility. You're literally in that one example, probably proving that you have like 10 or 12 of the skill sets that are on the screen right now. So again, it's a method of interviewing that you can actually practice before you get to the interview, because although you don't know what questions they're going to ask you, by having some of these examples available, like kind of in your repertoire, a lot of these different situations can be the answer to different types of questions in the interview. Thank you, Lauren. Okay. Preparing questions to ask. So again, your preparation for the interview is going to really help you with preparing your questions. So I like to think of when you're preparing questions, they're in usually 3 different categories. So the first category is questions about the corporation itself. Maybe you ask about, you know, the growth, the expected growth of the company, or, you know, where they plan to expand internationally or things like that. The second bucket of questions are questions about the job itself, right? So you may see the job description and understand each individual part of it, but maybe you're not sure, like, what percentage of my time do I spend working collaboratively? What percentage of my time do I spend working individually, or whatever it may be? So you can definitely filter in some questions about the position itself that will give you some insight into your day-to-day functions. And then the third category of questions would be questions about the interviewer. So who doesn't love to talk about themselves, right? Especially if someone is genuinely interested. And for me, if I'm interviewing with a company, I would be extremely curious to know about that person's experience in the company and how long they've been there, and what's your favorite thing about it, and what's one thing you would change if you could. So I think that it's a real compliment to the interviewer that you're interested in them and in what they think about the company. So I would definitely at least leave time for one question about the person interviewing you. Okay. Dress for success. This is one of a topic that's dear to my heart. So at Enterprise and a lot of companies, we have a professional dress code. And even if a company that you're interviewing with does not necessarily have a professional dress code, it doesn't mean that you don't dress professionally for your interview, okay? Because it's a special occasion. So in general, a suit is a great investment, we'll call it, if you don't already have one. And typically you would stick with fairly basic colors: black, gray, navy blue. Sometimes there's some more, brighter colors, but I would stick with a more conservative look for an interview. And again, with the shirt, the dress shirt, you can go pretty conservative, white, light blue, black, kind of basic colors. Make sure that everything coordinates. Like if you have a tie on, make sure it coordinates with your shirt and suit. Um, Definitely make sure that your shoes are professional style and polished. That, like, the belt, if you have a belt on, that it coordinates. And also if your socks, if you have socks on, that it coordinates. Um, Also, like, I personally buy a lot of business style dresses and skirt suits. So there's a lot of different options out there. And the most important thing to know is that, this is a first impression, right? So this, again, may not be how you dress every single day, but it is important to look really sharp for your interview. Okay, in terms of grooming, again, very important. Everything should be, all your clothes should be neatly pressed, ironed. If you don't like ironing, which I don't, then the dry cleaner is very happy to put a nice crease in your pants, or make sure that your collars are nice and neat. And everything should be tasteful, including like a handbag or anything else that you might have with you. Hair, including beards and mustache, should be neat and trimmed. And again, like with Enterprise, we're a super professional dress code, but we absolutely allow facial hair. We allow mustaches, beards, or goatees. And we just ask that if someone does choose to wear facial hair, that they keep it very neat and manicured. Same with nails. Um, and it's funny, perfume and colognes, if you do wear any cologne, I would definitely go very, very light if you're doing an in-person interview, in case the person that you're meeting with is allergic, because you don't want to start a sneezing fit. It's funny, when I started interviewing years ago, I actually stopped wearing perfume altogether because just being in interviews every single day, all day, I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. Be careful what you eat before and during the interview. So if you are going to an interview, you probably don't want to go starving, because then you won't be able to think about anything but your stomach. So I would definitely have a snack before you go so that you don't have to think about it. And just make sure that there's nothing in your teeth before you do your interview. If you have a lunch interview where you actually are eating during the interview, then I would just be very careful about what you order. Don't order anything that you would have to eat with your hands, because that could get really, really messy. And maybe not a spaghetti dish with red sauce if you have a white shirt on. And then in terms of tattoos and piercings, you know, I would just go, again, really conservative if there are earrings on the lower lobes. And then if you do have tattoos, which a lot of people do, then I would just have them covered for the interview. Okay, so it's the day of the interview. So there's, again, a lot of preparation that goes into everything before you even get there. So one important thing is when you come into an interview, it's nice to have a padfolio, because you can put your resume on one side, and on the other side, you can have a pad of paper with all your questions written. So it's just a nice, neat way of bringing in a copy of your resume and your questions. Location wise, it's the most stressful part of going to an interview is finding the place and being on time. So if you need to do a drive-by the night before, I would do it. Or just if you can't do that, I would just absolutely leave yourself lots of extra time. So I would arrive in the parking lot super early, but only walk into the building maybe 10 to 15 minutes before your interview. If you walk in right at the scheduled time, that's almost considered late. Bring, again, your questions and your notes. And just make sure that if you do have your cell phone on you, that it is silenced. Okay, stage 2. Now you're in the actual interview. So there's different types of interviews. Sometimes you'll just have a phone interview. You might have an on-campus interview. I've done on-campus interviews plenty in the past, prior to the pandemic. You may have a first interview on site, although typically the first interview would be a phone. You may then talk with a human resources manager. And then a final interview is usually with the hiring manager. Believe it or not, even though, the hiring manager makes the final call on whether or not you get an offer, every single stage of the interview process is equally important, because if you don't do well in your first screening interview, you don't get to the next round. So you have to take every single round of the interview process very seriously. There are also different types of interview processes. So sometimes you're meeting with someone one-on-one. Sometimes you're meeting with a panel of people, which in today's world would probably be more virtual, but hopefully someday we'll go back to in-person interviews. You might have an interview series where you're meeting with a bunch of different people all on the same day. And then a search committee is a lot of times what they'll do for like a higher up executive position, or like a position in higher education that's fairly high in the totem pole. So sometimes it's a search committee that would be reaching out to you initially. So a lot of different types of interviews. The preparation is similar for all of them. You still have to be super prepared no matter what. And then I think, Lauren, the next slide goes into kind of phone interviews first. Okay, sorry. I thought there was a different slide. Okay, so let's talk about phone interviews. So they, again, just as important as an interview you would go on in person. Make sure that you have your date and your time confirmed. Make sure you have a quiet place where you won't have any distractions. Try to have information in front of you that you would need at your fingertips, like the organization's website and any of your notes in your resume that you might want to look at and refer to. Again, just like an in-person interview, you would have questions prepared. After the interview, you would want to send a thank you. The quickest way to do that is through email. So hopefully you have the email address of the person interviewing you. And even though you're not, even though you're not going to be seen, it's not a bad idea to dress up because it'll make you feel like you're ready for your interview. Okay, virtual interviews. So virtual interviews, again, take a ton of preparation, almost more preparation than actually driving to the interview site. Because you'll have to find a really quiet place with a great Wi-Fi connection. You don't want technology to ruin your interview time. Make sure that you have a neutral background. Obviously, with technology nowadays, these virtual backgrounds are amazing. You don't want a messy visual in your background. Like you don't want to be in your bedroom with a bed that's not made behind you or clothes all over the place or distractions. And you do have to be careful about what's on the wall, so the best advice I can give is to have a very plain background or have a virtual background like what I have on. Again, you want to dress professionally, just the way you would if you were going in person. Make sure that you test your technology ahead of time for any virtual call. And make sure that you have the latest version. If it's like a Skype or a Zoom, whatever it is, make sure you have the latest version of that. And this next point, looking at the webcam and not at the individual faces, I have a hard time with that because I like looking at a person when I talk to them. So I try to, if I'm on an interview, I try to move the person that I'm talking with. I try to move their picture up to the top of my screen right near my camera so that I can still look at them, but it doesn't look like I'm looking down when I'm in the camera. So basically all the advice that applies for an in-person interview applies with a virtual interview, which is prepare, practice, and follow up. And if you do that, then you're going to set yourself up for success. Okay, stages of the interview. So there's typically sort of a flow to an interview. The best interviews are those interviews that really just feel more conversational than anything. There are some people that do interviews that are very, very formal and it doesn't feel as natural. Hopefully you'll have good experiences with the people you interview with. And for me, I like to keep it more conversational, but I also have to keep it fairly structured because I'm on a tight time frame most days. So like, for instance, when I'm doing first round interviews, I have them booked every half hour and I can't go over because I've got someone else waiting for me. So I do have to kind of be very timely with it, but I like to keep it conversational. So typically I do introductions. It's nice to meet you. Even when I'm on a virtual interview, I always say it's nice to meet you. I will typically like verifying information, like I'll verify, oh, so I see that you're a senior, at Bridgewater, majoring in management. And by doing that, like sometimes a resume, something has happened recently and it's not updated. So sometimes like someone will think they're graduating in May, but they're actually graduating in August and they haven't updated their resume yet. So by doing those kind of verifying fact checking, then I just kind of know what we should be talking about. Because if it's someone who isn't graduating yet, maybe I can talk to them about the internship program. So then I would go into questions to the candidate, and I would also let them know ahead of time that if they have questions while we're talking, that they can like kind of jump in with them. But otherwise, I would leave plenty of time at the end. So typically I would go through the questions. I go through several behavioral based questions under the topics of leadership, mostly leadership, sales, and customer service, when I'm interviewing for our management trainee program. And then once I finish going through all my questions, and again, I make it as conversational as I can, then I kind of turn it over to see if they have any questions. And I use that time when they're asking questions to me, I use that time to not only answer their questions, but also promote enterprise, because there's a million wonderful things about our company. And I want to, as much as I'm asking for information from the candidate, I also want to share a lot of information with them so that they know, what a great organization is that they're interviewing with. And then I always close the interview with next steps. So if you're in an interview and the person you're interviewing with does not let you know what the next steps are, it is definitely okay to ask. By asking, you're actually showing that you're super interested, right? It's not being pushy. It's like, hey, I'm really excited about this opportunity. Do you mind if I ask, what I should expect from here or what the next steps are? And so again, it helps to practice saying these things ahead of time. And then once you conclude the interview, again, make sure you follow up with a nice email. I would email so that you can get it over to them the same day. Okay, so communication skills, again, I keep talking about communication skills, but it's so important. So it's really important to speak clearly when you're, talking with an employer, to use proper grammar and pronunciation. So really try to avoid slang. Um, Try not to talk too fast. This is something that I struggle with all the time because I am definitely a fast talker, but I try to slow down when I'm on an interview or doing a presentation. And it is okay. I've learned this over the years. It is okay to have a little brief moment of silence. If you're not comfortable with a little bit of silence, then you're going to keep talking for each question, and to the point where the interviewer might not have time to get through all the questions. So a little bit of silence is okay. When you finish your thought, then just finish your thought and then let the interviewer take over with the next question. If you, an employer asks you a question that you need a little bit more clarification on or don't understand, it is absolutely okay to ask. So it's better to ask for clarification than to give them an answer that doesn't actually answer the question. Some nonverbal communication, handshakes, who knows if those will come back, right? We've taught, firm handshakes ever since I can remember. And right now, of course, with COVID, we cannot give handshakes. So hopefully that will be back in our culture at some point. But smiling is huge. Let the person know that you're happy to be there. Maintaining good eye contact. Having good posture is super important. Like, you can't sit in an interview and slouch, because the signal that it gives to the employer is that you don't want to be there. Be super positive. And again, the dress is just super important when it comes to first impressions. Stage 3, the follow-up. So I've mentioned a couple times, but following up is really, really important. An email is it's a professional way to get in touch with someone really quickly before they make their final decision on you. I will tell you a story. My college roommate called me one day a few years ago, and she was like, "You're never going to believe this. You're going to be so disappointed in me." So she was in this really long interview process for a pharmaceutical sales position. And it got down to the final round. It was her and another candidate. And she had started doubting whether or not she was going to be willing to move for this position, but she still wanted to get the offer so that the control was hers, so she could either accept or decline the offer. And because she was having these doubts, she forgot to send a thank you letter to the final interview, the person that did her final interview, but the other candidate did send a thank you. And when the employer called her to let her know she did not get the offer, that was the reason. And so basically the person told her, the two of you were neck and neck in the process, but the other person showed that they were more interested in the job, and we made them the offer. So hard lesson to learn. Again, she wanted to have the offer so that she could make the final decision, and she didn't have that opportunity to. So it really does matter. The follow-up matters. It's a really competitive job market, and there's a lot of candidates in the market. And so anything you can do to make yourself stand out in a positive way, I would recommend doing. Feedback. Okay. So if for any reason you do not get the next round, it is absolutely okay to ask for feedback. Be polite about it. Not every employer is going to offer you feedback. So I do whenever I possibly can, but the nature of my job, I have so much on my plate. I just don't always have time to get back to everybody with feedback. And so I wouldn't take it personally if they're not able to offer you feedback. But if they can offer you some honest feedback, take it with grace. Jot down notes, because sometimes when you're getting constructive feedback, it hurts a little. It's a little bit of a sting. And you may not remember everything they say because you're just kind of disappointed with the outcome. So I would take notes and jot down notes, and then really take the feedback seriously and work on making things better for the future. Because any feedback that you get on an interview is going to help you with future interviews. So you can ask both what you did well and, where are my opportunities for improvement, and hopefully they'll be honest with you, and you can, kind of take it for, for improvement in the future. Okay, the next step. So if you'd like to practice, Lauren can probably tell you more about this, but the Career Services Office does offer mock interviews. And Lauren, do you want to expand on that?
So I was just going to mention that, after completing, this workshop, you'll have the background on what you need to know to do the initial prep. So then you can call the office to set up. We schedule 1 hour practice interviews where you do need to set it up in advance, because we ask you to send us a resume and a job description. That way the counselor meeting with you can do a little research, especially if it's a more niche position that we may not be as familiar with. That way they can spend some time going through researching questions and making kind of a mix of questions to ask you. So like Saray said, we like to ask a lot of behavioral based questions, some common ones, industry specific, and of course always throw in maybe a more of a curveball kind of question to kind of see how you handle more difficult situations. And then spend the balance of the appointment after we go through the practice interview talking about, again, what you're doing well, any areas that you can improve on, and then to kind of start to pull together that strategy to excel in those next steps there. So interviews are just that sort of thing that, I know it sounds a little trite, but to say that you only get better with practice going through the process. And even when you're nervous, the practice and going through it will make you better. I mean, prior to grad school, I hated doing any types of presentations. Interviews were not the kind of thing I wanted to do. Public speaking or anything, not anything I ever wanted to do on there. But through the needs of the program that I was doing, and just practice of presentation, practice of working with people with interviews, and then having to go through the whole job search years ago and all the different interviews you have to go on, the multiple levels, you start to learn. So that's why, as we go through the process of job hunting, one thing, and Saray can probably comment, but I always suggest, within reason, accept interviews, especially when you're new to the process. The first interviews could just be some practice, and you may think it's an employer you're not as interested in, but you could go on the interview and all of a sudden realize that, you know what, I'm really excited about this place. This is somewhere I want to work. But you can also use it to your advantage, and it's fine to ask questions because maybe it's not a place you want to work, but through the interview, you're learning, you're getting asking questions, you're getting information. So, and I'm sure Saray, you can vouch for this, but it's supposed to be, in a way, a two-way street. The employer's trying to learn from you, and you're trying to learn from the employer so that you're making an informed decision either way as to if it's going to be a good fit for you, just as they're trying to decide if it's going to be a good fit for them.
Yeah, I'll add on to that to tell you that the jobs that you don't get sometimes are a blessing in disguise, because when I was interviewing with Enterprise, I was also interviewing for an outside sales position that I thought was my first choice. In hindsight, I know for sure if I had gotten the job, which I didn't, I got declined in the final round of interviews for that job. I was kind of crushed. But I know for a fact if I had gotten that job and taken it, I would not still be there. And here I am at Enterprise 26 years later. This was my second choice and I absolutely loved it. So things happen for a reason.
Yes, most definitely. All right, so that brings it to time for your questions. I don't see any typed in the chat box, but at this point, if you want to unmute yourself and pop on and ask any questions you have, now's the time for you to ask those specific questions that maybe we didn't cover thus far. And maybe while people are thinking about it, Saray, can you tell us a little bit about how maybe the current environment and having to move to everything virtual has kind of changed the process for you, and maybe any, I guess we could say, the strengths and weaknesses of it, the things that have been great and maybe have helped you in making hiring decisions, or the things that have happened that have maybe been a little bit more difficult and things that maybe candidates should avoid, of course.
Yeah. You know what the funny part is? The more challenging part for us was getting our hiring managers on board with doing virtual interviews. We are a frontline business, right? We're a customer service business, so we like the interactions in person. And my hiring managers had a tough time with making that transition, I think. But I will say, in the big picture, everyone has adapted really, really well. So I've hired more people in the past 8 months than probably ever in my career in an 8-month period. And we did all the interviews virtually. So from a candidate perspective, there's a little more challenge with, I think, the professionalism, because people tend to not take it quite as seriously as if they were going there in person. So at times, but overall, we've been really, really impressed with the level of professionalism and with how smoothly it has gone under the circumstances. So we've pretty much adapted at this point. I don't know that we'll ever go back to all in-person interviews ever again. I see us maybe doing 1 out of 3 in person going forward.
Okay, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Other questions from the audience? Well, I'll go with another one for you, Saray, as we're kind of talking about handshakes and everything like that, as I start to think ahead to when we are back on campus, when we are meeting in person. How do you think we're all going to handle that? Because I'm sure at first, so for quite a while, handshakes are not going to be a practice. And you see the people doing the elbow bumps or everything like that, or just a polite nod. So since it's such an ingrained piece of culture when you go up to somebody to introduce yourself, what are your thoughts on that and how we're going to kind of handle that changeover, at least probably for the next year or so?
Yeah, it's funny, even in a non-COVID world, I think what COVID has taught us is that we were passing a lot of germs, probably not, like, wasn't really that necessary before. I don't know. I'm no expert, but I'm wondering if, like my father is 80, he's probably never going to stop shaking people's hands, but I wonder if the younger generation will kind of figure out another way to greet people. And maybe it's just a smile and a head nod, or I don't know about the elbow thing. That might stick. You never know. Um, I almost see
Still at
people.
the beginning, but yeah.
Yeah, I almost wonder if they'll maybe do more of the head nod. I don't know, but I don't know if we'll go back to handshakes. It seems like it's a unnecessary thing when it comes to spreading just germs in general.
I gotcha. No, it's come up a couple times, and we keep it in some of the presentations because we're just not sure, and it's a good conversation starter to say, how are we going to handle this as we start to
Yeah.
move in? Because I think that's going to be a big transition for a lot of you
Mhm.
all. It's just kind of, we've gotten very used to being in a virtual environment, but I think no matter what, while processes will probably remain heavily hybrid and virtual, there's probably going to be a move to back to more in person. Probably at least final interviews probably are going to become, an in person deal again at many organizations. And some
Yeah.
places you just can't help it. If you're in education, you're going to have to be in there. They're going to probably bring you in to possibly teach a lesson in a classroom or something.
Mhm.
There's some areas where you're just going to have to be in and to prove a certain skill set or something in person. So some of
Right.
those items may come up. So,
Yep.
all right. Let's double check. Any questions that anybody wants to ask? And if you're not comfortable popping on the mic, feel free to type them in the chat box as well. But while I just wait for that, I guess, Ray, is there any final pieces of information that you'd like to provide that maybe we haven't talked about thus far?
Um, well, one other thing I was going to leave you with, I'm putting my email in the chat. And you can reach out to me anytime if you have a question about interviewing or if you're interested in learning more about enterprise, I would be absolutely very happy to talk to you. You don't have to apply first. If you wanted to kind of chat with me first offline before you apply, then I'd be happy to take your call, or if we can schedule a virtual call or just a phone call.
Okay, great. All right, it looks like everybody's set. Just waiting to see. We've got a typing there, so just give them a second to see if a question pops through on that. But I
I
guess
see
while
some,
we're doing that, yeah, no,
I
as
see some
everything the
thank
virtual
you.
line, we see the types on there. So, but yes,
Yeah.
but thank you very much for presenting today, Saray, and for your offer to work with any of the students. And
Mhm.
again, if any of you have questions that come up after today, you can reach out to Saray, and obviously you can reach out to our office if you want to set up practice interviews, or if you have other questions getting ready for the job search, just give our office a call. We're remaining to do virtual appointments at this time. I give you both a virtual handshake. Okay. All right. Perfect. So yeah, this probably will have me. Well, I'll just have little hand cardboard cutouts or something. So we'll see what the next steps are. But thank you for those participating today. And again, thank you very much, Saray, for presenting. We appreciate your time, and thank you all, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great
Thank you.
rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.